Yeah, the program is live now. Recording started. You may start now.
Namaste everyone and a warm welcome to each and every delegate and speakers on this esteemed platform of FP, that is Financial Professionals for Nation. Recently, India and Australia concluded its free trade agreement, and we are organizing this particular discussion on the investment opportunities in Australia and the Indo-Australian FTA. I would now request Narendran ji to give a welcome speech and introduction about this whole event. Uh, Please, over to Narendran ji. Please take over. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sumit. I welcome you all for this very important discussion. I think this would be a beginning of a systemic change in the way free trade agreements operate. So, really appreciate so many of you from, I guess, about 9 countries who have taken time off from different time zones to be here. I really welcome Bill Cole. Uh, he's an international expert with the BDO Australia. There's a lot to learn from his experience in building brands and global corporations. I really look forward to, really appreciate you, sir. Thanks for taking time. Jaijit ji, who's another expert who's going to share his views today. Jaijit Bhattacharya. He's been with KPMG for a long time, but I think now he's really on to something which is very futuristic. He runs a digital economy think tank, a study based out of Delhi. So he's been through this free trade agreement. So he's going to add a lot of value, which will enlighten us about how to free trade agreement. Just coming to free trade agreement, it has been used as a government to government enabler for trade and tariffs and pave way for business to come in. But I think this time around, the post-COVID world, it is very important that it just not just happen between government to government. The success of this will happen when not G to G by B to B and P to P, people to people and business to business. And this exactly is our objective in bringing people together and getting the best minds together to start thinking about how to take advantage of this landmark free trade agreement. So that has been our endeavor in be able to bringing the right information from the real expert so that we really understand the profundity of what this means to both countries in this case, which is India and its diaspora all across with Australia. Now, ours is an initiative which the host is FP for Nation, which stands for Finance Professionals for Nation. It's a voluntary group. We are about 300 members in about 14 countries. Each one of us comes from a strong financial services background, be it a CA, CPA, or people who are offering various services in financial services, maybe consulting, treasury, advisory, to policy and policy support. The finance professionals across the world play a very important role in managing businesses and its future and the fund flow and the future fund flow, investments, etc., is a very important milestone. And in bringing the finance professionals and great thinkers together to talk about this subject. So right now we are about 300 members from 14 countries. We meet once a month. There are various subgroups, and we take up issues of great importance, which is going to change the way commerce happens in the world. We started off with understanding cryptocurrencies. We talked about artificial intelligence. We talked about various India's budget, what it means, post-COVID economics across the world. And today we have taken up Australia's free trade agreement. We will soon have another session on UAE, where India is very close to signing a trade agreement, and then followed by maybe the British Prime Minister was here in India. So there is also something brewing with United Kingdom and India. So this gives us an opportunity or a platform to bring like-minded people together, get them to look at the larger issues about the future of economics and we're all volunteers. We take time off our profession to spend time, not just the event. An event like this takes about uh, 200 to 300 man hours in terms of people talking to each one of them, explaining to them, talking to the chief guest, briefing them, getting them on board, getting their buy-in. So this 300 man hours across various parts, it's a voluntary force. The idea is to bring about the real facts of it, unbiased. We just want to evaluate and understand this in the right perspective so that the finance professionals then go on, and this 300 chartered accountants, which actually means each one of them having a sphere of influence on at least $100 million of capital flow in the next 2 years. So you can just see the potential of this. We are constantly expanding this. We wish to cover as many geographies as possible. It's just a voluntary force. We don't do any trade, we don't facilitate, we are only enablers, and we bring the right people together, give them the right perspective, get the best experts from the world, anywhere, wherever they are, to come and talk to us, share their views and thoughts. So that is this group. I request each one of you who are participating today, please do join this group. We also get some good posting, and the content is the king today. We try to bring as contemporary and as real issues which really impact the future of finance profession as well as the economy of various markets in the future. And third is, I would just like to welcome Sri Ravi Kumarji. Raviji, namaste. So he's been our thought leader, and he's been the basic, uh, motivated us, give us a perspective, give us a vision. And under him is what is called a Pride of Bharat. That is just a umbrella brand which we have, under which we do several activities. Finance Professionals for FP for Nation is part of Pride of Bharat initiative, which Raviji has been our leader and inspiration. So he spent long time in various countries. He spent 40 years away from India across 6 countries. So he brings in the international perspective of human endeavor, not just in economics. So under his guidance, we also do several activities. One of the activities we recently started, we have built a network of about 42 countries where we talk to policymakers and we take up specific issues about future of democracy. It's a common concern for mankind all across, definitely more for the democratic nations. We talk about the future of democracy. There is a series of policymakers. We get people from different parts of the world and different uh, ideas, different uh, orientation, to come and talk about their view of the future of democracy. That's an initiative which we do. We also do another group called, on the technology side, on artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency. We run a group to look at future of healthcare. Corona has really redefined health nationalism. So we realize that in order to protect you, everybody else across the world has to be vaccinated to be safe. So healthcare is a new paradigm in the post-corona world. We have a group which looks at healthcare. We have a group which looks at importance of sustainable agriculture, technology, innovation in the field of agriculture, food processing, farming, etc., etc. Education is another area of interest. So, like this, we have several groups under Pride of Bharat. To be specific, we run about 72 groups, and we have people participating from 42 countries. We want to bring about the real issues which impact human endeavor of the future, irrespective of politics and territory, or what we call a country. The issues which affect mankind are pretty much the same. More than 90% of the issues, we all want a happy life. We all want peace across the world. We want a great environment, good food, clean air, no war, peace everywhere, and prosperity grows up economically. We all go up and have a happy life. If the issues are common, but policy making is divided across countries, and that is how the world is structured today. We believe that if you bring the best of minds, very concentrated minds together, be it a policymaker, in power or opposition, politicians, bureaucrats, investors together and look up issues of which commonly affect, which are very common. This is an idea to build consensus, learn from each other, and that is all the initiative which started by Mr. Ravi Kumar. That is what we are. We are completely voluntary. We take time off our
Good
profession and
luck.
career to invest into this with a belief that the world is one family. We all actually connected
How
in
in
multiple ways. Corona has reinforced and taught us that irrespective of color, geography, race, culture across the world, we all have one family hardwired to each other. I think that is the whole idea of World is One Family initiative. And this umbrella institution, uh, a virtual brand is called Pride of Bharat. I'm just saying this so that we all understand the big picture, the small picture, and here to specifically as to what we are trying to do. So I welcome all of you once again. Uh, please participate in the program very effectively. We will have a Q&A at the end of it. And I encourage not only you yourself joining this group and also bring about like-minded, well-meaning finance professionals to be part of this group so that we can take up more contemporary, more relevant issues which is going to impact our future. Thank you very much and wish everybody a great time for the rest of the year. And Bill, I hope the new government, whatever happens in Australia, is good for the rest of the world and really look forward to listening to you, Bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I must say, as an observation, your formation represents, in my experience, a very important and or groups of your type represent very important and powerful organisations in the world of commerce, certainly, but socially and politically also. And I commend you all for having these dialogues and seeking to understand the broader issues. The fact is that the discussion today only came about because 2 to 3 years ago there was a lot of push about the fact that the agreement discussions between India and Australia had become a bit of a laughing stock. They'd gone on for a decade without much coming out of them. The point was made, at least I think both at the Indian and from my side, the Australian end, to our foreign affairs people, that governments at the end of the day don't trade, businesses trade. And the interests, pressures and insights of business would be the things that would take this forward, given that the bureaucrats had failed. And it is my understanding that those words were heeded. So we sit here today because basically business groupings such as yourself has taken their environment into their own hands and made their politicians do what they should be doing and serving businesses and the people. Anyway, as you can tell, in Australia, everybody's of a political mind at the moment. It's even seeped into my my presentation for the evening. So, in speaking with Shiraj and the others, I was given a very broad brief around both the agreement, but importantly also the broader statistics and attributes of the Australian economy and what what those things might mean for potential Indian investment, trading goods, etc., etc. So I've created a framework which I'll move through, but obviously that's not the be all and end all of my knowledge. It's merely what I present to you in the time I have. The question and answer session, obviously we can go down into further detail. So the relaunch of the previously stalled agreement occurred in September 21. Minister Tian on our side has been a particularly energetic trade minister and has been very effective, I think, in moving forward some of the more sluggish negotiations across a range of agreements that Australia's considering. The outcome of those discussions, excuse me, was the interim agreement named the Australia-India Economic Cooperation Trade Agreement, which was, remembering it's an interim agreement, which was signed between Ministers Goyal and Tian in April of this year. The intention, it's worth also noting, is to conclude negotiations on a full comprehensive economic cooperation agreement by the end of the year. Now, what does that mean? As an aside, if we look into the agreement, we'll go into it in further details later. There are a lot of, if you like, intentions, discussions about negotiations, discussions about future agreement, etc., etc. So the first thing to note is that as much as there are significant amounts of specific information and intention within the agreement, there are many things that are yet to be properly panned out, and the detail is lacking. Keeping that in mind, it is a milestone, and it falls into in Australia's circumstance the category of pending agreements, and for that, I think the Australian business is similarly energised and interested in the same way that you are about the opportunities. But in the scheme of things, and you've already expressed to me so far in this meeting that your group has a very global view of issues such as trade and investment and everything else. Why is this an event of note? Why is an interim agreement between Australia and India something of significance? Well, the first point is what I've already gone through. We've had 10 years of government intentions that have gone nowhere. All of a sudden, we find ourselves with an interim agreement within the space of 6 to 7 months after 10 years of nothing. So that of itself is a significant indicator. Something has changed. Something has been occurred that has required a response. Previously, both Australia and India have had clear trade priorities with other countries. Australia has put in place 16 operative preferential trade agreements over the last 20 years, both regional and individual. And this has resulted in a significant orientation, a very significant orientation to North Asian trade, China, Korea, Japan, etc. So that's a very dominant theme in our trade agreements. We've only just in the state of having an interim agreement with our first, if you like, northwestern country, which is the UK. All our other agreements have really been Asian, Southeast Asian, North Asian. So now we have something that is pending with India. And similarly, if I look at the big picture policy intentions that have been visible from Australia about India's orientation, I mean, there's a clear focus on what happens in the US in terms of digital and computer trade. I know a lot of the preferred destinations for students, etc., relate to those kinds of economies, and the EU, of course, is of significant interest as well. So we're in a circumstance where both countries have really been focusing on other things. So what's new? What's new, I think, over the past 2 years, 3 years, has many facets. The first facet are the shifts geopolitically. So it won't be news to any of you that the relationship between Australia and China has deteriorated significantly politically, and increasingly with overtones of military implications over the past couple of years. The impact on trade hasn't been as significant, but the threats that have been issued, the interruptions to trade in certain non-critical commodities, in certain non-critical commodities has been significant. And the we've got to,
just a second, Bill. Excuse me, I'll just check. Just a minute. I think somebody's unmuted himself. I'm just muting him off. Yeah, I think now everybody's off. Please go ahead, Bill. Sorry
about that. So we have the geopolitical situation, and I think everybody would be aware of how that's falling out in terms of alignments. Australia for many years felt that it could have political and military ties with the US and still trade significantly with China. China, in my words, not the government's words or anybody else's, but in my words, China has taken the attitude of Australia as the little brother and has attempted to use extraordinary language and coercion to try and keep us in line. And I think our circumstances won't be fixed in the near future. So what has that done? The weighting towards China in our trade relationships is very significant. China's probably around 30% of all trade, destination for all exports. North Asia, probably 50%. And in a small open economy, which Australia is, 50 cents in every dollar of GDP. So we're highly trade dependent. The lack of diversification in our trade weightings, I think, has now been brought home to policymakers and businesses generally. The net result of that has been a desire to diversify. And Australian trade policy over the past 18 months has started to re-emphasise Southeast Asian relationships, the importance of potentially of India replacing being a replacement origin for a lot of the commodities that were previously sought from China, and also India as a source of cooperative foreign direct investment. And I'll explain what I mean by that later. So we have, if you like, a geopolitical situation which has triggered a reassessment of economic dependencies. The net result is, of course, that Australia's trade policy, which is significant in terms of, if you like, laying the groundwork for businesses to trade with other countries, has shifted, and more effort has been put in to resolving whatever the issues were between the bureaucracies in Australia and India. Okay, so that's a mechanism. What's the current state, I suppose, of trade? So two-way trade in goods and services is probably quite undercooked. Anybody would agree. It sits now at about $23 billion in two-way trade. Main Indian exports into the Australian economy are refined petroleum, interestingly enough, prepared medicines, and diamonds. So you may say, well, there's 1,000 other things, of course, that your economy produces. That's true, but if I may say, ladies and gentlemen, therein lies the problem and the opportunity. So we'll leave that for the moment. In terms of the relative economies, I think it's worth just going over a little bit about what Australia represents in terms of a marketplace. 25 million population. Obviously, that's I think that's shy of what Mumbai is calculated to be. Lovely city, Mumbai, but it could swallow us up in one gulp in terms of population. However, our GDP sits at the moment, excuse me, at about 1.3 trillion. So when I last looked, India was sitting at 1.3 billion people or thereabouts, and about 2.6 trillion in GDP. So our GDP is very high for our population. What that means, of course, to trading businesses and investors, high disposable income. Unemployment's just under 4%. Now, for the economists among you, you'll recognise that that's probably getting down to frictional unemployment levels. So the fact is there's an obvious gap in labour of all types, and particularly in skilled. Inflation's sitting at about 5%. I've not really tracked it globally. I know the UK is looking at 12%. Other economies are a lot higher. We think 5% is bad, but I suppose it's all relative. Economic growth is at 3.4%. So I suppose that's the relative term for comparison. Again, globally, that's in first world anyway. It's not too bad. The economy, the dominant economic sectors, service industry is probably about 65% of total GDP. Mining about 14%. Agriculture 2%. And that's worth a conversation later in the evening as well. Manufacturing around 11%, and construction and related services about 10%. So you can see that as much as a lot of the export growth is from mining and agricultural commodities, the actual domestic economy is not skewed that way. It has other emphases. In terms of key sectors, so that's a description of the economy as it is. Government policy is emphasising expansion and, I might add, significant grants and opportunities in advanced manufacturing, cybersecurity, and digital. I was interested to hear about the digital group that's being spoken about in your group. Food and agribusiness. When it talks about food and agribusiness, the government's talking about breaking away from the traditional Australian export format of exporting commodities. So raw wheat, raw wool. When they talk about food and agribusiness, they're talking about a value-adding process. We're of the opinion in this country that there is no more agricultural land per se to expand into. All we can do is use it more efficiently, use it to greater value effect. Medical technologies and pharmaceuticals are a huge emphasis, of course, pretty much everywhere. In Australia, the government's putting in a lot of effort to attract global businesses for both the manufacturing of pharmaceuticals themselves from raw materials, new innovations around new medicines, and also Meditech, the combinations of digital, computerization, robots, and medical equipment. Mining equipment, technology and services. So obviously mining remains a very significant part of the Australian economy. It is shifting, however, away from a traditional focus on ferrous metals and gold and coal to what are termed to be 21st century substances, cobalt, lithium, etc., etc. And a lot of the policy around mining and technology and related services is about beneficiation of, again, raw materials into usable concentrates or even final goods. Finally, energy resources. Obviously, like everybody else in the world, there's a persistent view about the need to transition the economy into a less carbon-emitting state. Electrification in the major cities is heading forward, particularly in heavy transport. And we think, I personally believe that'll be 10 to 20 years of significant reinvestment for suitable technology. So a huge area. Obviously, generation of renewable energy in terms of wind farms, solar, etc. I know for a fact that you've got Vestas, you've got a number, Suzlon, and a number of other very well-known, world-renowned renewable energy companies that manufacture in your states. So that won't be surprising to you. So all of these sectors and initiatives, excuse me, are at the Commonwealth government level, so the federal level. At the state level, individual state governments have their own development plans and are promoting industries off their own bat with their own incentives as well. So in my state of Victoria, which is in the south of the country, we have a couple of world-class plants, CSL not being the least of them, who manufacture pharmaceutical products. But obviously, the government is seeking to have clusters of these industries. Value-added food, Meditech, advanced manufacturing. So additive manufacturing is very high on the government's agenda for reindustrialising Victoria. And of course, energy again. We traditionally were a coal dependent economy with our brown coal resources, and there's significant moves by the government to change that into renewable energy settings. So that's the economic setting for the agreement. I'll just say a little more. I think I've probably already well and truly exceeded my allotted time, but I'll give my view of the interim agreement, and then we can move on. The agreement prima facie is of a grouping that I've called, some of the recent ones I've grouped them as what I'll call 21st century agreements. What does that mean? They stray from being purely trading goods agreements to what I'll describe as whole of economy agreements. What does that mean? It means that yes, we have the traditional tariff reducing attributes of a free trade agreement, but we then go into, if you like, broader economic settings such as trade in services, financial services, professional recognition, movement of natural persons, etc., etc. So the agreement contemplates an economic engagement that's greater than just sending goods from one jurisdiction to the other. It's designed to, if you like, facilitate far more elaborate economic relationships, and I think it's to be commended for that. I think if you can't send information, physical items, and people between economic jurisdictions, then you're really not covering the main game in this day and age. And the current agreement clearly has ambitions about doing that. If I look at the trading goods provisions, there are clearly some carve-outs around. If I look at the raw foods or simple preparations, cheese, nuts, dried fruit, etc., they all still have residual tariffs. Some of the other provisions, such as for beer and wine, they only seek to provide most favoured nation status. So the idea is really not to remove tariffs, but to give the best, lowest tariff that each party offers to other trading partners. Interestingly enough, pharmaceuticals and their precursors are mostly free. Most of the chemical industry is mostly free. We'd have the expected protection around steel and iron goods, but with some interesting zero-rated items within that. Plastics remain at MFN rates. So there's a blend, if you like, in the treatment of trading goods. I'm putting that down to the fact that it's an interim agreement. I think there's a lot more movement that will happen over time in the agreement around the goods trade, but here and now the interim agreement doesn't really contemplate it. I think the other area of major interest is the provision of business and post-study visas for natural persons. So there's generous, probably as generous provisions around business visas that I've seen in any of the agreements. Up to 4 years for intercompany transfers, up to 4 years for post-study working rights for students. All of those things I think are very, very positive. Our immigration department isn't a particularly friendly one, but I think they've obviously cut very good deals, albeit in limited areas for the purpose of the agreement. And I think that's very encouraging for, again, broader changes going forward. The areas, the provisions relating to trade facilitation and transparency in the agreement, again, are very positive because they allow us, if you like, to fix things that aren't working properly. And that's something I've seen in the last couple of agreements negotiated by Australia. I think in summary, I would describe the agreement as being a good agreement. It's not a great agreement, but I think it will move to that with further negotiations going forward in the year. And given the obvious goodwill and degree of urgency for the other matters that I discussed at the start, I think there's a great deal of political will to make it the best it can possibly be. I would urge you as business people and obviously organised coherently around sets of policy issues to maintain your dialogue with your negotiators on your side to really push this agreement as far as possible. Obviously, Australian businesses will be doing the same. Thank you very much.
Well, quickly, just to interrupt, you said it's a good agreement, not great. What would have made it great?
I am sick and tired of the agreements getting hung up on residual agricultural interests, putting blocks in the way of having zero rates. I saw it in the UK agreement. I saw it in the US agreement. The world has moved on, for heaven's sakes. 5% at the border is not going to save you. You know, it's just something that gets in the way of making these agreements bigger, better, and getting them focusing on what really matters. What matters? Flow of money, flow of ideas, collaboration of businesses. You know, next year we'll be buying our peanuts from Mexico. It's probably not going to have anything to do with India or Australia. Why are we holding up potentially great agreements on the basis of having all these silly little tariffs remaining in place? At the end of the day, these border rules are not the things that determine the survival of industries. It's their efficiency, it's their access to finance, it's their access to ideas. The other things, obviously, that will potentially come into a great agreement would be intellectual property protection provisions, all the bells and whistles, I suppose, that protect the sources of value in the 21st century. There's some good examples.
Okay, thanks. Back to Sumit ji.
Thank you, Bill, for a very interesting overview of the economic situation of Australia and the driving forces for the Indo-Australia FTA. Moving forward, may I request Udhamji to please introduce our next speaker, Dr. Jaijit Bhattacharya. Over to you, Udhamji.
Namaste. We have our next speaker, Sri Jaijit Bhattacharya ji. Jaijit Bhattacharya ji is working for technology-led governance. So what he's working is very interesting. You see, when Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam was President of India, that time most of us were using Kodak reel, not digital camera. Whereas Dr. Jaijit was writing book on e-governance in the country. So he is a visionary. He saw things very early and worked on that. He is president of Center for Digital Economy. He wrote 6 books. He was part of big MNCs like IBM, HP, KPMG, and he is from IIT, done his PhD. I welcome Dr. Jaijit and request you to give your opinion about the current topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Udhamji. Before we proceed forward, may I request Subhash Bapna ji to please introduce Dr. Chitra. Over to Subhash Bapna ji.
Thank you, Sumit ji. I'm audible.
Yes.
Am I audible? Yeah.
Yes, you are audible.
I feel pride to introduce Dr. Chitra. He's a divine power. She has got a divine power from all 3 of our goddess, Saraswati, Lakshmi, and Durga. With the blessings of the Saraswati, she did computer professional. She's a journalism education background, and she has experience in the newspaper, radio, and television. And she has written 16 books and more than 15 ebooks on various. The divine power Lakshmi has given her power and so many businesses in Hong Kong. She is director of trading company Global Impacts and educational firm XYZ HK Limited, taking our Indian tradition and heritage in.
Subhash ji, you are not audible. Subhash ji?
Yeah, now audible?
Yeah, now you're audible.
Audible. Chitra ji is having.
Subhash ji?
I think he's got some difficulty from his phone.
Yes.
Sumit ji, you can take this forward.
Okay, so may I now request Dr. Chitra to please come forward and start the interactive session on the FTA, which we can. Can I please request Dr. Chitra to please come forward and initiate the interactive session on FTA? Over to you, Chitra ji. Chitra ji.
Namaste to everyone. And first of all, I will thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to do this interactive session with the renowned guest speaker. And incidentally, Australian federal election is going on today and results have started coming as well. Hope a new government will try to have a better Australia. And thanks to Mr. Bill Cole for giving the lecture, explaining the reasons for giving the significance of FTA with India and the current situation in various areas. He actually covered almost all the areas and gave the economic setting in almost all industries. So before going into the session, I would like to inform you that we are really fortunate to have various business personalities from various countries during this session. And we are happy to have Mr. Smith Botra, Advisor of Government of Taiwan, Honorable Mr. Rajesh Chaplat, Uganda. He is a Pravasi Bharatiya Samman Awardee, past Chairman of ICAI Uganda Chapter, and Pencilman of UAE, Mr. Venkat Krishnamurthy, a Chartered Accountant, Mr. Krishnan Nathani, Chennai Chapter President of Young Indians, Youth Wing of CII, Mr. Daman Prakash Rathod, former member of Minorities Commission of Tamil Nadu, Mr. Sudhir Kumar Lodha, former member of Minority Commissions of Tamil Nadu, Mr. Rajiv Ajmani, President Bharat Vikas Parishad, Mr. Mahesh Sharma, Manpower and Construction, Mr. Raman Chawla, Industrialist Noida, socially active, Mr. Vinod Goyal, leading in agricultural industry, Mr. Deepak Garg, Chartered Accountant, Mr. Vimal Pandit, Industrialist, Bhiwadi, Haryana, Mr. Kapil Khanna, NBFC and Trading, Mr. Rajender Jain, MSME President, Sonipat, Mr. Satyendra Dwivedi, CMD, L Complex and Organic Farming, Mr. A.K. Agarwal, CMD, River Engineering, Mr. Gaurav Gupta, Director, Global Trading and Technology, Mr. Kanwar Vikram Singh, Chairman, Central Association of Private Security Industry. Though it is a long list, I would have left some of them. Please forgive me. We are really happy to have all such people from various places from India and abroad for this event. So coming to the session, I have few questions to give it to Mr. Cole. And there were some questions posted in the chat box also. So I will consider that also while talking to him. And the first one, actually, he was telling about the Australian status. So would you like to explain about the current status of Australia-China diplomatic relationships, sir?
The what I'll call the hot talk, which was a series of exchanges over 12 months or so, probably up until about the last 3 months, were in language that wasn't just diplomatic in any way, shape, or form. It was quite abrasive. It was quite threatening. In fact, the Chinese ambassador said things last year that I'd never heard any ambassador say to their host country, and needless to say, the hotheads in the current government reacted as you would expect. That language has calmed down. The new ambassador, I note, was not greeted by our Prime Minister, which is a significant action. But the dialogue now is more measured. I think the broader issues brought about by the Ukraine and the Soviet conflict involving NATO and the EU, I think has provided a broader context to intemperate words. So I think the first point to note is that the language has calmed down. What has happened in terms of actions? I think the Solomon Islands acceptance of significant Chinese presence and the clear and obvious intentions of China to try and exert significant influence with Papua New Guinea, which of course is right on Australia's doorstep, will be a new level I think of tension between our countries. But it's gone from hot fluffy talk to probably more significant considered actions, and part of me says that's more sinister. It's all very well to yell at each other and everybody go back home afterwards, but I think we're now in an environment where we're confronting significant issues strategically. I don't expect the relationships at the government level to be anything more than superficial if they are re-established. Economically, and my observations of clients and others in business, the tide has turned for a lot of Australian businesses. They're actively seeking alternative sources of goods, not only, of course, for geopolitical reasons, but the Chinese lockdown, the hopeless congestion at Chinese ports, all the problems of having concentrated sources of anything for your international trade or your inputs to manufacture is clearly an error. It always was theoretically, well, practically it is now too. So the impact on the ground is that people and firms are looking to do business with anybody except China.
So then it will be good for India. Thanks for that answer, Mr. Kaul.
I think India is very, very well positioned, and particularly look, your diaspora is active and engaged in the life of Australia. You know, so there are already, if you like, open doors to a lot of the information about what it's like on the ground. I think with that setting and the renewed interest in having closer ties, I think it's it augurs very well.
Yeah, it's great.
Sorry, Chitraji, I have a quick question for Bill.
Yes, please.
The
Yes, please.
change in government in today's election would make any difference, Bill?
I think at the end of the day, I think all the change in government will do is cause the diplomats to go through the movements, the motions of trying to build bridges. There is no stepping back from the fact that China is now going to build bases in the Solomon Islands, and it's seeking to do the same in PNG. It's what I was saying. You know, the words will now just be literally words. Underneath it, we will have all of these actions, and they are more sinister. I think. I can't see any of this pulling back the situation in a hurry.
So coming to the next question, Mr. Kaul, actually we have to now see about the service industry. So what are the incentives for service industry and the workers visa for Indian workers? And how about the business visa? So, and there is one question from the chat box. What is the scope for all types of labor providing companies? So you can just answer together for all these questions.
So the business visa categories in the interim agreement, as I've the caveat I put on my conversation is that obviously the agreement is interim, but I think it's only interim in the sense that if there are changes, there'll probably be improvements. They won't pull back from what's already in it. So having said that, the categories of interest, I think, are really what are called corporate transfer provisions. So these are provisions that relate to the movement of staff where there is an existing entity, where an entity exists in Australia. So the first act, of course, is to have an establishment, a permanent establishment in Australia. Once that's established, then there the business visas for transfer allow up to 4 years of work in Australia. The earlier categories where you have, if you like, provisions for business people coming over for meetings, for assessments of opportunities, etc., they're limited to 3 months, but they are generous also. So there's not much in between. You can have a 3-month visa to come and look at things, assess things, etc. But it's only when you actually make a decision to establish in Australia, or you go into a JV. So you're not limited, of course, to setting up your own business in Australia. You can be in joint ventures, etc. But those transfers are where the real beneficial visas kick in, and that's.
So yeah, please
look,
continue.
there are various sectoral tests. The text of the agreement points out that these are all subject to some of the tests that the government puts in from time to time about particular sectors. But the general scheme is, if you're transferring to your own company for particular purposes, then you have as a maximum a 4-year visa available to you.
So in that case, you are telling that it's difficult to start a firm there now, is it?
But no, I'm not saying it's difficult. I'm saying that the visa provisions are shaped around a corporate transfer rather than someone just coming over as an individual and trying to work.
There was a question in the chat box. Will government help us to establish our firms over there? Is it any possibility there?
Yeah, there's a lot of categories of business. There are, depending on the state and depending on the sector, there's assistance at both Commonwealth and state levels. Invest New South Wales, as an example, has significant benefits for setting up a business that employs X number of individuals in particular sectors, and they will, I don't know, give you, you won't pay any council rates. You'll get there'll be no stamp duty on your turnover. There's all kinds of things for different areas. It's unfortunately it's not general, so I can't say there's one rule across everything. But depending on sector, state, and if you like, scale, there's a lot of government assistance at the moment, particularly for big foreign firms coming in to Australia. They're very keen to increase the level of foreign direct investment.
Where can we get all these information about the state-wise and industry-wise investment opportunities in Australia?
All right. So each state in Australia has its own investment arm, and under each of those, and you can go online. You don't need me to do it. You can go online and find them all. So they all have their own investment arms. They all have their grants and opportunities areas, and you can just have a click and have a look around. Obviously, there's layers of detail that you have to go through, but that will give a good indication of which states are putting the most money. For instance, Queensland has very strong and valuable assistance for businesses setting up in what they call regional areas. So there are a lot of towns up the Queensland coast that have ports, some industrial infrastructure. They'll have trains, things like that. And if you set up, say Gympie is one of them, if you set up in Gympie, you get all kinds of state government assistance to do so, because they want to build up these regional centres. Similarly, in Victoria, if you're setting up in even in a major, in Melbourne or one of the major cities here, you'll get assistance if you're going into medical technical areas, because the state government really likes those sectors.
Yeah, that answer will help others, I think. And the next question is from Dr. Mahavir Chaplot. What is the possibility of starting cryptocurrency and crypto exchange in Australia? Are government policies supporting the crypto ecosystem in Australia?
Not as a crypto activity itself, but the idea of financial services, which is how I would characterize it after the unfortunate crash in the value of bitcoins, etc. recently. I talk about it as financial services. There's significant assistance for that. Also, too, a lot of the wind farm proponents, a lot of the renewable energy producers who are setting up new projects to generate electricity are very interested in co-locating with Bitcoin miners and other high energy digital users like server farms, etc. The reason for this is that firstly, those industries are very, very energy intensive, but secondly, having them near the source of the energy means that there isn't an extraordinary investment in transmission lines, etc., to deliver the energy. So there's been a lot of discussion about that. In fact, a few Bitcoin miners that I know of are moving from the US back to Australia to co-locate with wind farms.
Yeah, thank you for that answer, Mr. Cole. And there are a few organizations who are interested to develop relationship between industry organizations. So would you mind explaining a little more about the industry standard and industry associations in Australia?
So there's a wide range of associations. My BDO has strong links, for instance, in manufacturing and manufacturing excellence organisations. There's endless. The defence industry associations particularly strong and influential. So there's some very interesting clusters around value-added manufacturing. Certainly at the upper end, the end that would service defence industry, space industry, aeronautical, and energy. They're very influential and they're very well connected. We have obviously a couple of peak industry bodies who government go to all the time for both commentary and policy development. There's a lot of chambers of commerce dealing with, if you like, country-specific issues. So the Australia-India Chamber of Commerce, there's a couple, and a couple of others are well connected with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Australia in terms of their influence. So there's a range to choose from, which can be dealt with either in terms of the sector or the I suppose country of origin. In terms of standards, Australia has many layers of standards. Automotive goods, pharmaceutical goods, food standards, all of these, you must understand, ladies and gentlemen, grow out of the fact that Australia's an island. So it's really good at building fences. But it has had the good spin-off of ensuring that production of anything in Australia meets all global standards. So the standards are regulated by a body called JASANS, the Joint Australia-New Zealand Standards Association, and they basically are continually examining labelling, production requirements, all of the issues that go to any particular item that's produced or imported. We have specific ones for things like pharmaceuticals. Obviously, the Therapeutics Goods Administration is the peak regulator for anything that's produced as a medicament. One of the big debates, however, is whether something is a medicine or a food. So, before you go to the Therapeutic Goods Administration, make sure you're only doing it because you've got a medicine, because it can take a long time to get through. But all of these standards associations are now subject to significant, if you like, timelines and service standards. So with planning, a new product can be approved within 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Since you were telling about the pharma products, I have one question about that. What is your quality standard, licensing and certification in Australia, including TGA approval for pharma, medical products and equipments?
So there's various layers, depending on what you're going to do. If, for instance, I wanted to import a substance to study it, there's a layer of certification to do that. I have to apply for certain products to be imported. If I wanted to make them, I would need both my process and the good to be approved. There's a whole range of requirements around anything that goes into the human body, and it's significantly policed. What else can I say? It's a bureaucracy like any other, but I think COVID has caused them to improve their response to the marketplace significantly. Obviously, in the depths of the COVID era, we couldn't wait 6 months to have our tablets approved. We needed them very, very quickly. So they've been re-resourced, and they've been, I think, told to giddy up.
Yeah. Then coming to the commodities which are exported to Australia from India, may I know what are the major commodities traded between two countries now, and what commodities exported from India have fair chance to have good business in Australia? So that will be useful for more people, I think.
So I previously mentioned the three top ones, which are medicaments, refined petroleum, and diamonds.
Oh.
And so I'd suggest to you that all of those do quite well as it is. But if you look at the if you scan the consumer landscape in Australia, of course, there's you know, if I pulled some ideas off the top of my head about what I know are sourced from India, but you know, don't figure in the statistics because they're not significant enough. Obviously, leather goods, textile clothing, and footwear are significant in you know, any of Australian markets or stores. I think if I look at that sector, the TCF sector, you've just got to bump China off in terms of that sector, and I think everybody would prefer Indian cotton to Chinese polyester. There's a lot of opportunity to substitute. It's worth noting that some areas of the Australian economy are highly concentrated in terms of ownership and distribution. So if you think of Wesfarmers, which is a very large conglomerate over here, who have everything from supermarkets to clothing stores, etc., and they're all huge scale. I think approaches to those kinds of businesses to get them on board with some of the Indian commodities would start turning the dial very much in India's favour, because they're volume buyers, and they have a massive distribution.
And what are the opportunities in construction material supply, including ceramics, cements, and still considering industry is 11% of Australian GDP? So this is a question from chat box.
Yeah, the construction industry is in significant trouble in Australia through lack of construction materials, wood, steel, and so it goes. The causes are the obvious ones: bad supply chains, congestion at ports, concentration of China as a single source. Everybody's scrabbling to find plywood all over the world. Indonesia, Vietnam, South America, anywhere they can get it, because China's failed them. So the construction industry in particular, for a responsive supplier, would be a very good opportunity to establish a beachhead in that industry.
There is a question from Arun Singh. He's from Australia only. You mentioned the very generous business and post-study visas up to 4 years, and this is very welcome. However, you said that the working rights are in limited areas. Can you please provide more information on these limited areas?
Well, the agreement talks about the limitations are, as I've spoken about. So these are categories that provide any significant length of stay relate to corporate transfers. So that's your business to your business. So an Indian business sending staff to its subsidiary in Australia have up to 4 years under the at least the planned visa concessions that the free trade agreement offers. Everything else seems to be 3 months. I mean, look, remember again that we're not, we're talking about a particular agreement. There are general conditions around work visas under Australian law. So you don't need a free trade agreement to get a work visa, but these are meant to be concessional arrangements for Indians under the free trade agreement. There are other provisions. They're just not as generous.
Okay.
And they're not
question
sector,
from
they're not
Sumit
sector
Mehta.
specific, I might add.
Oh.
Sorry, Miss Chitra, if I may just add
Yes. Yeah,
for my
please.
question. So, hi, Bill. This is Arun, and my question was also regarding the post-study visa now very generously that's been opened up for around 4 years post-study for working, right? So, are there any limitations for the students after post-study in any areas which they can or cannot work?
Not under the agreement, no. But the agreement has a footnote that says, and look, it's not aimed at the post-study students. I think it's aimed more at the corporate visas, but it always puts the caveat that the Department of Home Affairs can decide, how many, who, etc., as they do with everybody. They're the deciding department. It's a caveat they put on all the agreements. But the agreement itself does not have a sector specific orientation. Postdoctoral students have got 4 years, postmaster students 3 years, bachelor students 2 years, without question by the looks of it.
Okay.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you.
Yeah. So this is a question from Sumit Mehta about the pharmaceuticals. Does Australia accept US FDA approvals for pharmaceuticals and GMP?
They use USA FDA approvals as the basis of their research, but they don't. It's not a pass through, if you like. It's not an automatic agreement. So they always have to assess. They always have to agree. They always have to certify themselves.
Okay. So coming to the financial field, actually, there are a lot of chartered accountants here. And Avadut's question, sorry. What is this question about? How much scope for financial services or financial services outsourcing business in Australia?
Everybody's really excited about financial services. I think what do they call them? They call them bridges now, and they it would be obvious to start establishing something similar with Mumbai and Delhi. They're obvious starting points for this, but I think if you asked anybody in the CBD in Sydney and Melbourne, they'd say that they're part of a peak industry, and it's called financial services industry, and it's a boom, and it needs to be promoted. Most of the governments would agree.
And next, coming to the renewable energy, you have mentioned few points about that, and Mr. Anil would like to know, would like to know about Australia plans on renewable energy, especially solar power plants and particularly solar equipments like cells, modules and inverters. Plans in Australia as well as any joint ventures or investments in India, since India has gone leaps and bounds in this field.
I accept the premise of it. What I'm aware of are some very significant businesses looking for investment opportunities. Some of the biggest miners, for instance, are now branching out into renewable energy. Obviously, Australia is a recipient of significant foreign direct investment around renewable energy, but I think the point's well made. Like most of our businesses, we need to go outbound and engage in joint ventures elsewhere. There certainly has been, I was very heavily involved in both solar and wind energy in the first decade of 2000, and the localized intellectual property that was developed around customizing European technology for the Australian environment was very significant, and I think the right businesses would have a lot to offer in a joint venture with Indian companies, because they're very, very good at making things suitable for unusual environments. India, of course, has a range of environments, all with very particular needs. I think it would work very well. Who would those entities be? Look, quite frankly, it would be the likes of Fortescue Metals, parts of BHP. The big end of town are definitely looking for opportunities. Some of the bigger financiers, infrastructure financiers too, are probably thinking about overseas investments in these fields. So the Macquarie Banks of the world, Goodman, all of those would, I think, probably be very interested in good, high quality sites.
This is
It all comes down to the offtake agreements, of course.
Okay, right. So this is question from Shankar from Singapore. Could you explain a little bit on the scope in automobile industry?
So the opportunities in automotive at the moment are heavily oriented towards parts and aftermarket production. We, of course, had successive governments who progressively removed the automotive manufacturers from the Australian economy for reasons known only to themselves. The remnant parts manufacturers, however, have proved to be highly resilient. They export significant amounts to the US and to Europe at very, very high margins because they've survived all kinds of cutbacks and productivity requirements. So they're very, very good at what they do. I put it to the questioner, though, that the real opportunity in Australia now is the successful development of an EV industry. Obviously, Australia's got probably 10 to 20 years of significant transition in heavy vehicles and light vehicles to electrification. We have no productive capacity at the moment, and a first mover with government support, I think, would do extremely well in this environment. I know I've had discussions with a number of the investment arms of the various state governments, and I think they're very keen to have those conversations. Obviously, the barriers to entry for an electric vehicle are far less than the internal combustion engine production facilities. It's from my perspective, it's going to be heavily assembly oriented rather than fabrication. But yeah, getting back to the main point, I think it's a massive opportunity in Australia. As are the batteries, as are the motors, anything of that nature.
That's good. So the next question is from Nichiket. Which 3 technologies will be the most sought by Australian market for the next 5 years? And what specific steps Australia is taking to get development accelerated?
I'm very happy to answer that, but it comes at a price of $2,500, which I need paid up front.
Is it?
Look, it's an interesting one. I think if I think about what government needs and what government is buying, it's buying services that allow it to integrate systems significantly. One of the big problems in government is the fact that it's full of standalone information technology that doesn't talk to each other. It results in errors, it results in inefficiencies. It becomes a drag train on the economy. So I think top quality IT technologies for government and for large business and telecom is probably would be number one. I think if anybody's out there claiming still to have adequate and effective carbon capture technology, then a lot of our problems would go away, but I suspect I would have heard about it by now. Transmission technology, energy transmission technology would be number 2, because the move to, I don't know what it's like in India, but the transmission infrastructure is not adequate for electrification from renewable sources in this country, and getting that right cheaply or within reasonable cost, I think is a huge challenge for the low carbon transition. I think the last one's probably I'm trying to move away from kind of computing and digital to something a little more practical. I think water filtration and purification technology. Australia's obviously spent an awful lot of time getting that right itself, but it's still not perfect. It exports a lot of that technology to other countries, but the problem of abundant potable water in both of our jurisdictions, I suggest to you, is probably a very, very significant issue, and getting more so as our populations grow. So that would be my number 3.
That's good.
Chitraji, Sumit
Yes.
here. Request you to take a few last questions before we end at exactly 5:30.
Yes, I have 2 more questions to ask.
Sorry,
So
Chitraji.
this is the question from this is the question from Vinod Goel. Oh, sorry. Continue.
Quickly, Dr. Jaijit can give some insight on what India is exporting to Australia at the moment, if we have some time.
Yeah, sure. The overall structure of the trade is essentially we're getting the primary industry outputs from Australia, and we are selling value-added outputs back to Australia. So that's largely the shape of the trade that we're having between Australia and India. Obviously, there will be exceptions on both sides, and so light machinery, engineering products. These are kind of the products that we're already selling. I'll cover some of this in the 20 minutes that I'll have. So when we go through that discussion, I'll go into further details. But overall, this is really the structure of the trade that's happening between Australia and India.
Good. So this is a question from Vinod Goel. What are the commodities in agriculture inputs like fertilizers or chemicals which can be traded between 2 countries? And what are the government rules and who can guide in this line of business?
So there are no barriers to entry for those goods. Typical requirements are around nitrates and urea as key inputs to fertilizers. Obviously, there's a global shortage in urea at the moment, and Australia's soils are notoriously old and deficient in most things. So the trace element side of things has certainly in the wheat belts. There's been a heavy dependence on those, but the general comment really is around nitrates and urea. No barriers to entry. The requirements for importing and distribution are just the same as they would be for any trader. There are no particular regimes around it, and there are no quotas or other restrictions.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And the next question is from Nitin from Dubai, and he would like to know the opportunities in Australia for the pigment industry, especially for pigments used in paints and plastics.
So the pigments, dyes, etc., under the free trade agreement remain at full duty. The country is totally dependent on imports. There's a few smaller producers, particularly in the paint side of the tariff, but mostly they're imported goods. The FTA doesn't give any relief on those items. So good demand, but no duty relief.
Okay, so the last but one question now, there will be one more question. In which sectors Australian government is encouraging Indian traders to do business with this agreement between India and Australia? This is question from Satya Billa.
So the government has been silent on those matters to this point. I fully expect those kinds of discussions to come to follow the rejoining of the negotiations to have the complete agreement, and that, if I may, that underlines the role of groups such as your own in terms of putting forward wants and needs and capabilities, and really maybe preparing the ground, if you like, for the areas where you want to invest.
So the last question, we have covered almost many areas, and would you mind to explain a little bit on the defense and security field?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Defense and security area industry. Defense and security.
Okay, so whoever our Prime Minister is in 2 days' time will go to meet yours in a meeting of the Quad. So the fact is that we're both in the same tent for defence industry matters now, and I think once again it's an area that the agreement is silent on, but I think we have sufficient time really to expand the requirements around that. What am I talking about? I'm talking about agreements dealing with the idea of government procurement. So if we're talking about defence, we're talking about governments buying goods for defence purposes from businesses, and that's an area again that's silent in the current agreement. That needs to be dealt with. Obviously, as treaty partners, there is a logical pathway to having special arrangements for Indian and Australian firms with each other's defence arrangements.
Thank you, Mr. Goel, for patiently answering all our questions. And thanks to Mr. Jagjit for answering in between. And thank you for the organizers for allowing me to handle this interactive session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chitraji, for an extremely well managed interactive session. Thanks, Bill, for all your insights and answers where you have addressed the queries of the audience. Now, I would like to go ahead and invite Dr. Jaijit Bhattacharya to share some insights on Indo-Australia FTA and the opportunities for Indian exporters. Over to you, Dr. Jaijit Bhattacharya.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think many of the issues have already been covered. So I'll skip some of the things that I was planning to talk about and focus straight on what is relevant from an Indian business's perspective. I'll give a little more background to why I'm here in that sense. This has been a decade-long conversation between Australia and India, and I've been deeply involved in it from the Indian side in 2014. And then the Australian Prime Minister and the Indian President met in Australia in 2018, and I was actually being called in to represent the Australian side on this discussion. And also to give you some more background as to why this is important for Australia. This is absolutely important for India, but also from an Australian perspective, they have had a continuous growth for over 25 to 30 years, in fact, and that is unprecedented. They grew on because of having good linkages with the Japanese economy. When the Japanese economy started stagnating, they grew with the Chinese economy. And now it's important that they and India have a mechanism through which Australia is more invested into India and therefore grows because of the growth that will happen in the Indian market. So having said that, also, I think there were some questions as to what the Australian government is doing in terms of ensuring a soft landing for Indian businesses who would like to do trade or engage in Australia. And as part of these interactions for the last 5, 6, 7 years, the Australian government has already been building it up. In fact, we are doing deep research with Australia India Business Council. We are linked to a whole bunch of lawyers and other experts on the Australian side. For that matter, we were already looking at ways to of having critical mineral mines being sold to Indian businesses. They were available just before the Ukrainian war, and now we all have woken up to realize how important critical minerals are. And so these are opportunities that are there. It's not just selling into Australia. There are many more opportunities, and I'll cover that in the next 18 minutes that's left. So to begin with, the summary essentially is that there is a zero duty import of primary goods from Australia, and that's what is of extreme importance to us, including agricultural produce, minerals, coal, wool, and so on and so forth. There's reduced tariff on wine, and they have very good wine, and we know that the wine market in India is growing. But there are some exclusions, which includes beef, chickpeas, which is very important from an agricultural perspective from Indian side. It's a politically sensitive issue, and dairy products, as well as some of the food grains, precious metals, jewelry, and most of the medical devices. So that is out, but even after that, we have a massive amount of export lines opened up to Australia and from Australia to India, and that's a huge benefit that we have. So taking that forward, some more background. Australia is only the 17th largest trading partner of India, right? And for Australia, India is the 9th largest trading partner. So I wouldn't say that we are both very significant in terms of trade, but the opportunity is in terms of the future that's going to open up. So India-Australia bilateral trade was roughly about $27-28 billion last year. But we grew, I mean, this entire trade grew 135% between 2019 and 2021. So you can imagine the kind of possibility that is there. And most of the experts believe that this will double in the next couple of years. So we're going to hit $50 billion by 2024-25. That's a huge amount of opportunities that we're talking about. I'll not go into the details of what was the basket of trade that was happening. I think there was some question in terms of India's export. So India's export considered a broad-based basket largely of finished products, and was about $6.9 billion that we exported. We imported $15.1 billion, which was largely raw materials, minerals, intermediate goods. So that's what we imported. And in terms of our exports, these are machineries, light machinery, engineering goods, and so on. So the trade, as I said, is supposed to go up to $50 billion in the next 3-4 years. And the other aspect we need to keep in mind is that India and Australia are partners in the Trilateral Supply Chain Resilience Initiative, which is part of the entire Quad and so on that Bill was eloquently talking about. The point I'm trying to bring up is that there is significant political will on both sides to deepen this relationship. So if somebody is investing into India-Australia trade right now, they will be in good state. If somebody is ignoring this opportunity, I think that's going to be a bad decision, given that there seems to be a very robust future in this corridor, the India-Australia corridor. Having said that, let me also bring in a sobering thought, is that with this trade agreement, it's not that we will be ending up beating China and Australia. It just gives us a level playing field between India and China with respect to the Australian market. China and Australia already has a free trade agreement. Right? Within that, China has been playing truant. They stopped import of coal, wine, few other things. So those industries are desperate to ship those products to India. However, when some of you land up in Australia to push your goods, do keep in mind that you need to be more competitive than China in pushing those goods in. So even after all the tariffs that go away, it only provides you a level playing field with respect to China. So what does a trade agreement include? And I'll go into a little more detail because that'll be relevant for some of you. That's the mandate I got from Chirag. So I'll go a little more detail. So some of the labor-intensive sectors of export interest to India, such as gems and jewelry, textile, leather, footwear, furniture, all of them are manufactured goods, right? They're value-added goods and they're labor-intensive. food and agricultural products, engineering products, medical devices, automobiles. So these are all part of the basket that opens up. Also, India will be offering preferential access to Australia on over 70% of its tariff lines, so including lines of export interest to Australia, which are primarily raw materials, coal, mineral ores, the critical minerals I was talking about, wines, and so on and so forth. Keep in mind, wines is important from an Australian perspective because they've suddenly lost out the Chinese market. So I'll repeat some of these goods I talked about: gems and jewelry, textiles, leather, footwear, furniture, food, agricultural products, engineering products, medical devices, and automobiles. So these are areas that you can start exporting into Australia with these preferential lines. Also, one of the Australian companies, Rio Tinto, was my client, and unfortunately, they used to be the largest supplier of raw, uncut, small diamonds to India, which used to feed into the large diamond industry. But they were bringing it from the Argyle mines, and unfortunately, the Argyle mines is kind of run out of diamonds anymore, so they'll be closing it down. So I heard the conversation on diamonds. So I'm just bringing that up. That the supply chain for diamonds will get hit because of the Argyle mines closing down. We want to work on ensuring that there is no job loss happening on the Indian side because of that issue. There's export of several labor-intensive sectors currently facing import duty of 4 to 5% in Australia. They will all gain from this intermediate duty-free access. This includes textiles and apparels, few agriculture and fish products, leather, footwear, furniture, sports goods, jewelry, engineering goods, a few of the pharmaceuticals and medical devices. So tariffs on the remaining 113 tariff lines is about 3.6% of India's exports will be phased out in 5 years. So that's a small basket. These 113 tariff lines which have, or the products which have not been touched, is only about 3.6% of India's exports to Australia. And even that's going to go away in the next 5 years. Once the elections in Australia is over, the trade agreement actually is signed formally by the new Prime Minister, and that's taken forward. There always also was a bunch of questions regarding trade in services, and I think Bill covered most of those issues. So Australia has offered wide-ranging commitments in around 135 subsectors and a most favored nation in 120 subsectors, which cover key areas of India's interest like IT, ITS, which is big. Many of you might be already involved in IT, ITS, business services, health, education, audiovisual. Again, some of these details will evolve as we jump deeper into it. There will be issues coming up as as you actually land up, but these are good indications that's coming from the trade agreement. So the key offers from Australia, and this includes even chefs and yoga teachers, Indian students on reciprocal basis, and these were covered. So to the extent of chefs and yoga teachers and so on has been covered as part of this agreement. I'll skip more of the issue that's coming to your mind in terms of services. If you have questions, you can feel free to reach out to me. Australia will also gain considerable market in India, with tariffs being eliminated on more than 85% of the Australian goods exported immediately, rising to almost 95% in over 10 years. Now, this is important. Why is this important? I'll just come to that when I close my discussion. But it's important to keep note of all the benefits that Australian industry will be getting in India. Also, tariffs on items such as wool, sheep meat. I think I had a question from sheep meat that Chirag said I should be covering. Now, sheep is interesting because Australian wool already has significant part of Indian market. Australian sheep meat already has 20% of Indian market. And the wool and the sheep meat, I'm not an expert in that industry, but they seem to be interrelated. The sheep lead to the wool. When they can't create wool, they become sheep meat. So these are interesting industries to keep track of. Again, all primary sector industries, coal, alumina, metallic ores, critical minerals, as I mentioned, all of these rates have been brought down to zero. Then there are a whole bunch of agricultural products which is being allowed to be imported from Australia into India, which includes avocados, onions, cherries, shell pistachios, macadamias, which is quite popular in India now. It's growing quite well as a market in India. In-shell cashews, we are good in processing cashews. We were trying to get cashews from Africa and process them in Meghalaya and so on. Now we can get cashews from Australia and then process them in India. I mean, Kerala is a center for processing these cashews, so we can do that. Blueberries, raspberries, again, all of you know these are fruits which were not present in India, and now they're growing really well as a market demand. Blackberries, currants, and so on and so forth. So these all will become zero duty. Significant duties will be cut on Australian wines. These are all again opportunities. Services, specifically financial services, except on insurance. Again, Bill talked very deeply about the financial services. Except for insurance, everything else is open, which is legal, right? Legal from an Australian perspective. For example, if they are frowning on crypto, as like most other countries in the world, you need to be careful about what you're bringing in. Telecom services, professional services, which includes accounting services. These are all opportunities that is getting opened up because of this trade agreement. Both countries have decided to facilitate the recognition of professional qualifications, licensing, and registration procedures between professional services. Also, as Bill mentioned, temporary movement of natural persons. It's not going to be a open season. I saw one of the questions where somebody is supplying unskilled labor. That does not seem to be welcome over here. Skilled labor is definitely being welcome. Do keep in mind that Australia's population is less than the population of NCR. If you include Delhi, Gurgaon, and Faridabad, the population here is more than the population of Australia, and they're generating half the GDP of India, right? And that's happening because of the nature of the economy. It's more focused towards primary goods, so you can mine things, you can make things out of agriculture. If they get into processing, they would not have enough labor, right? So it's a function of how much what's the population of Australia in that sense. And within that, if they open up a free flow of Indian labor, that'll be quite a challenging situation from an Australian perspective. So therefore, there are checks and balances. It was a major ask from the Indian side, and I think this is a major consideration that is being provided by the Australian side, which we are hoping will get replicated in all other trade agreements that we sign. In terms of pharmaceuticals, the agreement enables trade in human prescription medicines, including prescription, generic, and biosimilar medicines. Since people asked about these questions, I'm just going through those details. Each party's pharmaceutical goods regulators have to go through what is called the Good Manufacturing Practice, GMP inspection reports. Those of you who are into pharmaceuticals know about these issues, and the regulatory authorities needs to be involved in that. The process needs to come up. And again, there are people that can help you if you're willing to, if you are looking at exporting to the Australian market. Now, the point is, what is not in this agreement? I think there are a lot of these questions. Is this in? Is this not in? See, most things are, it's a pretty free trade agreement in that sense. In the sense, most of the goods are included in this trade agreement. And as a starting point, many services are getting involved. What is excluded is the dairy sector, because India is sensitive for its dairy sector. Many jobs and livelihoods are linked to the dairy sector. Many of the agricultural items, such as chickpeas, as I mentioned earlier, is excluded. Walnut, pistachio nut, wheat is excluded. Rice, bajra, apple. Although I don't know in today's circumstances why wheat should be excluded, but anyways, wheat is excluded. Apple, sunflowers, seed oil, sugar. So these are excluded. There's some more items which are excluded, which where the concessions have, where no concession have been extended, includes silver, platinum, jewelry, because we have a very large gold and jewelry industry, and that needs to be protected because of the jobs involved. So silver, platinum, jewelry, iron ore, some of the medical devices, these are excluded from this trade agreement. So I'll just go through a few more data points before I come down to my conclusion on issues that would be of interest to most of you. The sheep meat used to have a 30% duty. It is now being reduced to 0. And the sheep meat already has 20% of the Indian market. So it's great news for people who would like to bring quality meat from Australia to India, and it will be quite competitive. Coal used to have 2.5% duty. That's been reduced now, reduced to zero. Again, great opportunity. We are always short of coal. I don't know why. We are also coal producing, but there is obviously a difference in the quality of coal that Australia produces versus us. Great opportunity. Wool, again, from 2.5%, it's being brought down to zero. All these other products are talked about from agricultural perspective. It's avocados, onions, macadamia, nuts, cashews. They had 30% duties. That is being brought down to zero in the next 7 years. Same with almonds and oranges and so on and so forth. So they are also being brought down to almost zero in the next few years. That's a huge amount of duties being removed. That surely is going to open up the market. The Indian market is to grow for all of these products, and therefore they form a great opportunity for those who would like to get into these trades. Elimination of tariff on coal, alumina, metallic ores, manganese, copper and nickel, critical minerals, titanium, zirconium, and so on and so forth. So I'm just reading from my notes on the particular items that have been where there will be an elimination of tariff. Great opportunities. As I mentioned, we were involved in actually helping out in bringing business opportunities in mines. It will be great for Indian businesses to actually start getting into the mines itself. And that's one of the things I was actually trying to say earlier also, that please look at what all can be imported from Australia, because you can actually start looking at owning some of these businesses in Australia. You already know the Indian landscape. You already know how to do business in India. If you can get ownership of the production of some of these items from Australia, you will do extremely well in the Indian market. And that was a point I wanted to push in and wait for, till I give you some of these data points. It is a no-brainer that some of these mines should have been grabbed by Indian businesses while they're still available. Obviously, there'll be competition from China, but if some of you are familiar with mining, are familiar with agriculture, it is a great opportunity to go ahead and grab these sources of products from within Australia, because those are available. Some of the other items, LNG will be zero. Pharma and some medical devices will become zero over 5 to 7 years, and so on and so forth. So this gives you a broad understanding of what are the opportunities available. So it is not just exporting into Australia, but also figuring out what you can do by owning businesses in Australia and exporting back into India. In fact, one of the points that I had mentioned when I made my talk at the summit between the Australian Prime Minister and the Indian President was that there is significant complementarity between Australia and India. And one of the, again, very low-hanging fruits, and it's almost a pun when I say fruits, is that you can actually grow mangoes in Australia during their summer, which is our winter, and provide mangoes to India when it's winter. So imagine having mangoes in December, which you can grow from Australia and send to India. So there are these low-hanging fruits, again, no pun intended this time, of the complementarity that Australia and India provides. And therefore, if you're getting so much of raw material at a much lower cost into India, and India has significant labor force available, we should also be looking at turning this competitive advantage into an export advantage for India to other countries, not just to Australia, to other countries. And that is where the power of Australia and India comes together. So if you can get cheap raw materials from Australia, minus all these duties and having preferential import rates and so on and so forth, it's high time we should start putting our thinking hat to figure out where else we can unleash the manufacturing prowess that India has by getting cheaper quality, cheaper raw materials from Australia. Also, if you look at wines, for example, vineyards is something that you should be looking at. There are agricultural lands and so on and so forth. So there is a huge amount of possibility between Australia and India. In fact, one of the things which is interesting to know is that Australia has one of the largest population of camels. These are feral camels. They're wild camels. They're not native to Australia. They were brought into Australia, and we know how much the camel is worth in many places in India, in Rajasthan, and so on and so forth. So there are opportunities. We need to look deeper into into what this trade agreement is actually providing. It is not just an export to Australia that we're talking about. We're also talking about imports from Australia back to us, and Australia and India together finding their competitive advantage and exporting to the rest of the world. So these are some of the key points I wanted to discuss. I'm kind of done because most of the other issues will end up being a repetition, which is already covered by Bill and were covered in the question answers that were put in the previous 20 minutes. So if there's any other questions, I'll be happy to take that. And thank you for the patient hearing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bhattacharya, for your insights. Very interesting points in terms of investing in Australia to handle sourcing of raw materials and products for Indian market. Very good insights. Thank you very much for the same. Anyone has any questions? I believe nobody has questions. In that case, can I request Chirag ji to please give a formal vote of thanks?
It's Mandarji. Sumit Mandarji will do that.
Okay, Mandarji, may I request you to please give the formal vote of thanks?
Sure, Sumitji. It was a pleasure listening to the enlightened speech from Mr. Bill Cole, and after that, Dr. Jaijit Bhattacharya, giving real insights of what's going to happen between India and Australia, how we can take advantage, and as an entrepreneur, what all opportunities we could have in coming 5 to 7 years, trading more with Australia, sourcing from Australia, and doing businesses or setting up our own businesses in Australia, how the things are going to pan. So I'm sure that all the entrepreneurs attending this web meet would be pretty happy to have an insight and overall view of the situation which has been created with the free trade agreement between India and Australia. I'm aware that we are already here for almost 3 hours now, and it's pretty late for Bill in the evening. But I would like to extend my sincere thanks from our association, the voluntary associations, financial professionals for nation, to Bill, especially for all his insights and very nice and straight answers to all the queries what we raised during the time. Also thank Dr. Chitraji for conducting the question and answer sessions very nicely and summing up all the questions together. Thank you, Dr. Jaijit Bhattacharya, for summing up the crux of the trade agreement and in the language which normal Indians would understand. And it was very simple language to understand and form our views. So all in all, I'm very sure that the efforts put in by all of you to bring this topic in front must bear good fruits in coming future. I cannot stop without extending my gratitude to Raviji, whose inspiration has created this organization or the voluntary organization. Also, sincere thanks to Narendran ji, Mahavir ji, Subhash ji, and Udham ji, without whom we wouldn't have been able to do this program. So their guidance and mentoring for the group has been very good and consistent and priceless. So last but not the least, I thank Chirag ji and Sumit ji and all the volunteers from FP4 organization. And also, I don't want to fail to mention name of Laghu Udyog Bharati, which is the largest SME organization exclusively working for SMEs in India, spread all across India, and plenty of Laghu Udyog Bharati members have joined today's discussion. So would like to thank them all also for giving such a good response. And I'm sure that they would take complete advantage of the information what we have gotten here. So thanks once again. Thanks for taking out your time at so late in Australia, of course, and thanks for all the participants from 9 different countries with different time slots in their respective countries. So thanks a lot, and looking forward for some more programs like this, which would help us all. Thank you. Sumitji, over to you.
Thank you, Mandarji. Thank you very much for all the support extended by you and other office bearers of Laghu Udyog Bharti. And I'm sure all the members of Laghu Udyog Bharti will also be benefited. With this, we end today's interactive session and discussion on Indo-Australia Free Trade Agreement with Bill Cole and Dr. Jaijit Bhattacharya. Thank you very much, both and everyone. With this, we end today's session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
We can, Sumitji, we can have informal discussion if any of the members would like to say anything for future events or today's events feedback or any other discussion. It's an informal event. Official event is closed, but people can stay and talk and introduce themselves.
Yeah, is it disconnected? We are disconnected from YouTube?
No.
Disconnected YouTube.
Labour Party has one in Sumitji, you can stop the recording. And
No, I can't do it. I think Narendran ji will have to do it.
Sundar Krishnan, host has to do it. The Labour Party has won the elections.
Yes.
Commodities goes. And so but as far as relation with China is concerned, both of them are.
It doesn't matter.
Both the parties are angry with China.
Yeah, I don't. It won't result in any significant change in foreign policy. It's gone too far now.
Yeah.
We either give them the keys to the front door or we keep going as we are.
I think the YouTube recording is still ongoing and live.
Oops.
Sundar Krishnan, please stop the recording.
Have a good night, everyone.
Please stop the recording.
Good night.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much.
Good night,
Thank
Bill.
Mr. Bill Cole.
Left.
I was in Australia for 10 years.
So, Chiragji, we had a good number today. While Bill was speaking, it touched almost 110. So it's like good.
Mandarji, Chiragji was telling the same to me. He messaged me that we have crossed 100 when Bill was discussing this. So quite a good turnout.
Yes.
Probably we can do much better next time.
Yeah, we will try.
I guess there's an internal.
So Labour one means who's the new PM?
With your permission, can I drop off? Is that okay with you?
Oh, thank you, sir.
Please.
Thank you.
बहुत अच्छा था. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Dhanyawad.
Thank you very much, Jaijit ji. We'll be in touch.
Surely, absolutely.
In fact, he made it very simple for Indians to
Absolutely.
understand the whole subject. Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
It was very clear.
The accent made a lot of difference.
Accent also made a
Yes.
After record.
Okay, thank you. I will drop off for now. Thank you.
Raja Ramachandran.
Jinendra Khara was the Austrian manager in
नहीं दोबारा बताइए.
Jinendra Khara was the business development manager from Australia. He was appointed in Ahmedabad for a long time. Jinendra ji, if you can please introduce yourself and talk about your experience as an Australian representative in India.
Namaste. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I was with Austrade in Ahmedabad, managing Gujarat region for 9 years. That's